Hi, welcome to Channel Squared, where we connect with you, the divine, and channel here with you live. I'm Heather Marie, founder of Soulgate.
And I'm Jody Lynn Craven, founder of Abundance Consciousness. And today we're talking about the fertility journey, miscarriage, and how it happens more than you think.
When we were, I know, right? The big sigh. when when we were discussing this particular topic, there were a lot of different avenues that we talked about going down. And so I want to encourage you, if you're watching this or listening to this right now, to kind of take inventory of, how you feel about this topic, what you would like us to talk more about, if there's anything in particular that you want us to go deeper into, because we're going to talk about this in a way that is personal to us and may not be representative of something that you have experienced, but that you would like maybe us to talk about and to get some feedback from, our guides on or whatnot. And so we really encourage you to participate in this conversation. So hit us up in the comments. If it's something private and you don't want to share it in the comments, you can always privately message us on Instagram at Channel Squared. And we can, certainly, continue this conversation. Because we first and foremost want you to know that you're not alone and that this is something that happens, and that we're here to support you. So that said, Jody Lynn and I are no strangers to the fertility journey. We're currently on it now. We're both trying for our families, and we have had quite the experience so far. So
Yes.
I think I think Jody, we should start with you and what your fertility journey has looked like first, and then we can go into my fertility journey and what it has looked like. And it'll be really interesting to see what the similarities and the differences are, because we have had some very different and yet very similar experiences.
Yeah. Um, I feel like nobody told me anything before I started,
100%.
which that was the hardest thing to wrap my mind around. Is like, how do I know so little about this cycle that I've had for decades and how a baby is made? Like, nobody told me that it would be hard. And I'm glad that they didn't put that in my mind that it would be hard, but I also had it in my mind that, like, you could have unprotected sex once and get pregnant. So, like, don't do it when you're young. Like, be very careful. I remember being very worried about that for a really long time when I was young and in young relationships. And so when my husband and I got married, I think one of the most notable things, or a notable item in our journey, and it's interesting that we talked about this last week about communication and tough conversations, is we never really had a conversation about when we would start trying. I mean, obviously, before we got married, we talked about the importance of kids and that we both wanted them and everything else. And I was like, boom, as soon as we get married, like that day, let's pull the goalie, let's do all the things. So, like literally, we get married and I began trying. And um it wasn't until like 6 months later that I remember having like this meltdown of being like so upset, of like, I'm trying so hard and you're not, and all of this stuff. And my husband looked at me and he was like, we're trying. And I'm like, yeah, like, why do you think I'm giving you my schedule of ovulation? Because you should know, like, what why, like, in my mind it didn't make any sense, and in his mind he had no idea. He was like, oh yeah, cool, thanks for the information, lady. Like, great. Like, he'd always had it in his mind that, like, we had already done enough this year. We got married, like, we had a huge year, and we pulled off our wedding relatively quickly. Like, we got engaged in December and then we were married in July the following year. So we had a lot to do, and we had it at my family farm and stuff like that. So there was a lot to build out. So he was like, we're just going to relax and go on a honeymoon, and like whatever happens, happens. And I was like, baby. So communication is important, and we missed the mark. I thought we were trying, he did not. And fast forward to August-ish 2019. That was the first time that I had gotten pregnant. And I live in Canada, so we have socialized healthcare, I guess you would call it, free healthcare. And I'd never really been involved in any sort of like healthcare things. I had never had a miscarriage. I didn't know what that was like, and the experience was atrocious. I just started bleeding. Sorry, TMI, but um you clicked on the episode. But I started having that like a week after I found out I was pregnant. And I was like, oh no, what's happening? And was panicking, and I was in all of the emotions. And when I went to my doctor, my like family doctor, he wasn't there that day. So I saw some other guy, and he was like, yeah, I think you're having a miscarriage. Yeah, you think or and I remember in that moment being like, what, like WTF, like seriously, what do you mean you think? And he was like, well, we should probably do some more tests and whatever. And I was like, okay, like, can you do them? No. You got to go to a place that can do an ultrasound, and you got to go to a place that can take your blood and whatever. I'm like, well, like, give me the requisition form. I'm going to do all of this right away. And I got into my car, and I like going to, there was in the I don't know how much detail you want on all of this, Heather.
Yeah, the details, the details.
The details. Okay.
Yeah.
So I remember like walking from the clinic, and in the same building was an ultrasound place. And I remember like I walked past it to go to the clinic that I would always go to. And I remember from exiting the clinic to like almost the door to where this women's clinic was, where they do ultrasounds, I just like lost it. And like right in front of me, so there's like a wall here, and my back is against this wall, and then there's this open store that is a pharmacy, and there's like the pharmacy workers in there, and like the cashier and stuff like that, and I'm just like sobbing, like I need to get myself under control. And they're all just looking at me like like what's with her? Like, I'm sure like that's how it felt anyway, was they were just like staring at me like I was an alien with three heads. And I'm like, I just need to like get a hold of myself so that I can walk into this place and ask them, demand of them to give me an ultrasound like right now. Because I was in Edmonton, and I live outside of Edmonton, which is like an hour from where I was. It was about an hour and 20-minute drive. Like I was not going to go home not knowing, or at least not having the tests to get the information that I need. And so I composed myself, and then I went back in, or I went in there, and I mean, you could tell that I'd obviously been crying, and I convinced the lady to get me in like right away. She's like, how much water can you drink in like 20 minutes? And I was like, a lot. You tell me what to do and I will do it. Okay, great. She sent me away with the instructions, and then got the ultrasound. I went for the blood test, and then the next day I ended up seeing my family doctor, and he had told me, yeah, I'm pretty sure you're miscarrying, but it wasn't like this 100% thing. And I was really in disbelief. Like I didn't know what the protocol was, what was happening. And it was very awkward also, because he was like, so are you good? Like, what do you mean, am I good? Like, you're telling me that I've just lost a baby, and am I good? No. Can I go is the question that I asked him. Like, can I go now? And like I had requested that we have another blood test to be sure. That's what he wanted. And I agreed. And I was like, I'm not good, but can I go? And then left his office. And this is where kind of things took a turn for the worst. A week goes by, and I didn't hear from him. He said, if anything changes, promise I'll give you a call. And he never called me. and I think we should talk eventually. I think this is way too much to talk about today. But my experience versus my husband's experience is very different. Like I knew like as soon as we conceived that we were pregnant. Like I don't know, I can't explain to you how I knew, but I just knew. I knew when there was implantation, like I just knew. I felt things starting to move, my smell was heightened, I wasn't feeling good, like I just knew that I was pregnant and I had no verification of it. So I had, it'd been several weeks since I knew. But for my husband, nothing had changed. So our reactions to losing a baby were very different. And that was really hard on me because it's not like he didn't care. But, he said this several times. There is no handbook for men. Like when your wife loses a baby, like how are you supposed to be? Like we don't even talk about this as women about the experience of having a miscarriage. Like how can we expect them to even understand or to know, especially when like my body hadn't changed. It's not like all of a sudden I had a great big belly or anything. I just, you know, was pregnant. Like I liked a little more garlic and parmesan than the day before. Like it really nothing changed for them, but everything seemed to change for me. Nothing changed for my husband. So yeah, so I go through an entire week of like, okay, processing feelings, and it's really odd. Something, I don't know if you felt this, Heather, but something that I felt was conflicted because nothing had changed and yet everything had changed. Like, how do you grieve somebody that was never here, that you never met, that you never held, that you never interacted with, and nobody in the entire universe here on the planet, I guess, not the universe, but on our planet, had never interacted with? How do you grieve that? Are you allowed to? Like, these are the questions that I was asking myself, is like, can I be sad about losing something? Because it was such a short time frame. Like after I took the test, it was a week later that I miscarried. So like it was only a week. Like there was all of these feelings that came up, like, at least it wasn't longer. And like, who are you to be sad? Like it was only a week. And it feels really shitty saying all of that out loud, because of course you can feel any way you want to feel. I know that now, but it was really conflicted. And then, so I was at that weak point into my miscarriage. And then all of a sudden, I started having immense pain. And I'm like a tough farm girl. So I'm like, I'll muscle through it. Thought I just had to poop or something. I don't know. I just wasn't sure what was going on. Like maybe this is normal. And, after passing out on the couch, and then the next day it wasn't feeling bad, but the feeling started again and it was painful. So I thought I should probably call. We have HealthLink, so you call them and you get their advice on whether you should go to the hospital or not. Pretty much, I think every time I've ever called, they say, yeah, go to the hospital, and they give you like a time frame. So they said, yeah, you got to go to the hospital. And to make a really long story short, we went to one hospital and they're like, you're just missing the miscarriage. And we think anyway, they had to do a bunch more tests because my last blood test that I had, that the doctor promised that he would call me if anything had changed, well, that one had shown all of my HCG rise, which is an indicator for trouble, but he didn't call me. And so this doctor ran more tests and things were almost exactly the same. It was a couple points difference, but she thought I was missing the miscarriage. And there's like a pill procedure that, stick up there, and it's not very comfortable for 24 hours, but you eventually move through it. And then when we were at that hospital, she had given me everything. I was getting dressed and like going through the miscarriage all over again, because she was like, I don't know if you had one, if you didn't, if you're still pregnant because of this one test. So I go through all of this all over again. And thank God she was very kind to me throughout all of it. She comes back into the room and says, that she doesn't feel comfortable with this course of treatment and that I should go to a different hospital. I'm like, oh, okay. I really had no idea what was going on. And so we went to a bigger hospital that actually had ultrasound. And after several hours, and I hadn't eaten at all, they realized that I was having an ectopic pregnancy, which is where the baby is in the fallopian tube. And so at this point, because it had been so prolonged and nobody had caught it, the baby was 4.9 centimeters in my fallopian tube.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my
So
gosh, that's unbelievable.
yeah. So it was at the point where, like, what if a lot of people don't know a lot about ectopic pregnancies. So just a little lesson on that, or like information on that, is when the baby gets too big inside of the tube, basically it creates, like, for lack of a better term, like it explodes. So it will, you know, take away, it'll burst. That's the right word. It'll burst. And it'll destroy the tube, and it can destroy other organs. And then you can have internal bleeding, and then you can die. So it's so severe that I was in walking around, whatever. I walked to ultrasound, and then they wheeled me back. And so I had no idea what was going on. They were just like, you need to be wheeled back. And I'm like, I'm fine to walk. Like, what are you talking about? Like, nothing has really changed. They gave me a Tylenol at the last hospital. Like, I was feeling okay. They were like, no, you can't walk. And so they admitted me on bed rest, like, that moment. And I was stable enough to wait for surgery till the morning. And when they went in, they took the baby out, and the tube as well, because it wasn't savable. So all of that happened within a course of 2 weeks of me finding out that I was pregnant. So, I mean, I asked the dumb question. Maybe it's not dumb, but I felt dumb asking it after the fact, because I kind of wish I wouldn't have. But I had asked, or my husband Nate had asked, if we would have went home with the first course of treatment, what would have happened? And the surgeon, honestly, they're honest people and no emotion, right? And he was like, wow, because you live so far away, you just would have bled out. So
You would
I
have
went through,
died.
I would have died. Yeah. And so all of that, like, there was, for me, that experience was losing a baby, and then, like, losing a physical piece of me because they took out my fallopian tube, but being that close to death. And then I'd never been through surgery or whatever, and I was by myself because Nate had to go home and take care of the dog, and they don't let them come in with you anyway. But I remember being in this place of, like, terror. Not that I didn't think they would do a good job or anything, but I was just terrified about going into surgery and going under, and, like, how's that going to feel, and what's this going to be like? And I really didn't know any of those things, so I felt terrified as they put me under, and I took that, like, breath, and then everything kind of goes black. And then when I woke up in that state of, like, where you're about to cry and the feeling is, like, right here, and you're like and so I woke up in recovery doing that, like, and the lady's like, you're okay, you're fine, you're alive. And I was like, am I alive? Like, did I die? Like, where am I? What's going on? Like, I was panicked. And she was like, you're fine, the surgery was successful, you're good, you're just in recovery, like, you can go back to sleep. And I was just not comprehending why I was still in that state. But it's because that's when they put me under. That was the state. Like, it's kind of like switch off and then they turn you back on. I don't know all that, like, medical terms or anything, but I was just in that state. And so for the week after, I was stuck there emotionally. Like, I could have died. Like, I would have died if that doctor didn't come in and take those pills away from me. So that was really hard for me to like reconcile losing a baby, and then, like, telling people, because I have the worst poker face. So, like, I could be, like, pregnant, like, just found out today, and you're like, you're pregnant, and I'll be like, no, I'm not. Like, I don't know how to hide things. I'm just a very bad liar, which is really great in a lot of other ways. But then there were so many people that I had to tell, and then you go through all of that. And so that was my first ectopic of pregnancy.
I
And I've
think
had
I think that that's one of the hardest parts about miscarriage, or ectopic pregnancy, or a failed pregnancy, is the fact that you have to tell everybody. And I think that there's so many people that wait until they're 12 weeks to tell anybody. I mean, I'm one of those people. I wait, until I am far enough along to like get out of that, danger zone. That's the first 12 weeks of, the spiral in the toilet bowl, like, because it's almost worse that you have to then share with everybody that that you no longer have the baby, that the baby's now gone. So you had two ectopics. So that was
Yes.
your ectopic that was like practically tried to kill you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So your second ectopic, how did that end?
Well, first, I want to say something about the telling people. I think that everybody's got to feel into it for themselves. And, like my immediate family knew, because I was living, we were building our shop, and we were living in our holiday trailer in my parents' front yard. So, and also after my surgery, my husband put me on the phone with my parents when I was all like looped up. I was like, so I had like surgery and they like cut out my fallopian tube. Like I was just high as a kite. I don't even know what I said to them, but I obviously said enough that they were like, oh God, because that was the first time they were hearing about it. So they called my brother and was like, Jody had surgery. You have to go to the hospital. They were like, what are you talking about? So more of my family knew, but in between that time of the ectopic pregnancy, the miscarriage and the ectopic pregnancy, there wasn't a lot of people that knew that we had miscarried. My parents were gone for the weekend when it happened, and there wasn't very many people that knew at all that I was pregnant. A bunch of suspicions, but like not a lot confirmed. And Nate was always of the belief system too, like you don't tell people until you know. And again, I'm a bad liar. So I just couldn't, like my parents knew because I was acting funny. But it was really interesting because Nate didn't know how to help me in that week period of not understanding the miscarriage and like how to relate to me who was feeling so shitty about it and all of this stuff. And he forced me to tell his sister almost. He was like, I think you should really talk to my sister. And she had no idea. And I was like, no, I don't want to talk to her. I don't want to tell people like this is going to suck and, whatever. And he was like, I think you really should. And like, they came over for supper and he was like, you should go inside and talk to Jody. And she like walked inside and he was like, Jody, you should tell her about your week and what's happened. Bye now. Slam the door shut. Oh God, love him. And I was grateful to speak with her because she had had a miscarriage the year before. And so she could relate to a lot of the things that I was feeling. And so it's hard having to tell people after. But also some of the darkest times, I wouldn't have had anybody. And I wouldn't have been able to go through that alone. And it was my friends who found out after the ectopic pregnancy and stuff like that, that checked in on me all the time, came to see me, whatever, that knew me well enough to know that they're like, oh, how are you doing? And I'm like, I'm good. And they're like, okay, stop bullshitting me. Like, how are you? My one friend Tanya asked me that. And I was like, I don't know. I'm okay. I I do not want to feel all of this. And she's like, what do you mean? And I said, I can't. Like, I literally can't allow myself to go through it. Like, I could feel it like this dark cloud sitting here. And I was like, if I allow myself to feel this, Tanya, I'll never come out. I'll never be able to survive it. Like, if I feel all of it, I'll never survive. And she's like, of course you will. We're right here. We've got you. Like, we know you. You're not alone. You may be alone in your trailer right this second as we're having this conversation, but you need to feel it or you're never going to move through it. And I was like, I know, but I'm just afraid. And she gave me that courage to feel it. And when I did, I was able to process all of the emotions, and it happened way faster than I thought it would. And I felt way better than I thought I would. And I felt, unstoppable after that, going through that, but really felt really cared for. So I think that everybody gets to choose who they're going to tell and everything like that, but you never want to go through that alone. It's way too hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
The second ectopic pregnancy happened like 7 months later, something like that, 8 months later. It was a little bit different. It wasn't in my fallopian tube. It was the baby attached to my ovary on the left side where my remaining fallopian tube is. And so they call anything that's outside of the normal placement ectopic. And so this time, because they had caught it early, now I'm under like strict doctor protocols. Anytime that I get pregnant, I have to like immediately pee on the stick. If it's a yes, I have to go get blood tests 2 different days and then go for an ultrasound. They're very cautious because I only have one tube left. So when I did that, when I found out I was pregnant again, I felt it way before I could test. And then when I tested, I immediately called the doctor and started that protocol. And then it kind of started happening again. The same pain started happening, and I like freaked out. I'm like, oh God, it's happening all over again. And I went to the hospital and spent the night there because they don't have like OBs on staff at 11 o'clock, and they won't tell you that they don't have ultrasound after a certain time. Even if you call and ask them, they won't tell you. So I ended up spending the night in the hospital, and then the next morning the OB had come and said, you're having an ectopic pregnancy. And because it was so early, they could give me what's called methotrexate, which is actually a chemotherapy drug. And so they shoot you up with that. And then you feel like crap. But it attacks anything that is rapidly multiplying. And that experience on its own was worse in ways. Because it wasn't this like dramatic thing that happened that everybody's like, oh my God, are you okay? And like, I literally had war wounds from it. It was more like this happened and I went through this procedure. And then it was kind of like everybody like went on their merry way, which was hard in itself too. But yeah, that was the second one.
So it seems to me that your babies have a navigation problem.
They did.
They
This is
did.
something that, yeah, this is something that I've worked on, because how do you talk about like in terms of like law of attraction, right? Like
Right.
I have fertility problems,
Right.
cancel, delete. I don't.
Right.
But like saying that, you're like infusing that in, but
Right.
how do you say something happened to me? And
Right.
so I was on a podcast, and this one of the speakers had said, you say I had. So I had fertility problems, or
Right. So
they had
you had
navigation
babies that
issues.
had navigation problems.
Yeah.
So, I'm wondering, like, and I don't know exactly how your medical care system works, other than the fact it seems like there's massively long lines for everything.
Yeah.
Um, but would IVF be a viable option? I mean, if you can get obviously you guys can create babies together, maybe, creating them and then plopping them right down where they're supposed to be will, assist. Is that something that you guys have talked about?
We haven't gone down that road. And that's, going back to how we were talking last week about tough conversations. There's a huge financial impact when it comes to going down that fertility road. And so that's something that we've discussed. The other thing is all of the hormones. I've had friends that have gone through it, and there's horror stories. Like they just weren't the same person and hated their life. Like it was just the hormones made them bonkers. So I'm hesitant, actually. Heather, you have been bugging me. I have some tests that I'm supposed to go through, and I've been just not doing them because the doctor that I have now, I can sense that she's kind of, for lack of a better term, given up. Like, yeah, it's not happening for you. There's nothing I can do. So, we'll do these tests, but if they're kind of inconclusive, you're going to have to go to the fertility clinic. And that's all there is to it. So I don't know. I've channeled a lot about this. And I've actually gotten Heather to trans channel on it several times throughout the journey, during the journey. There was one time that, my babies came through the trance, which was crazy.
That was nice.
And every, healer that I talk to says that I have 3 babies that are, right there waiting to come in. And every message that I get is it's just timing. It wasn't the right time. And even after the first ectopic pregnancy, I got that, that had to happen to clear out the pipes, literally clear out the pipe. And that was meant to be, that I was meant to, go through that part of my journey. And I believe that everything is meant to be. So I'm just waiting for this divine timing.
I think that you touch on so many aspects in your story that do not get discussed. There's always the story of like, okay, well, this is what happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, right? But some of the things that you talk about in your story is, like your husband's experience of it. And I definitely think that we should have them on the show.
Yeah.
I don't know if we'll get your husband on the show, but we could try. We will, convince him hopefully to come on. Um, but I think that it would be really interesting to hear, the men's perspective on what it's like to, go through miscarriage. Because, for them, in our mind, it's the same for them, right? And they don't really know how to support us. And, so they just kind of, I think when, we just had a miscarriage, just back in May, and that was miscarriage number 3, I think, for me. Maybe 4. I think that there had been, maybe a missed miscarriage somewhere along the way, but third confirmed miscarriage. And so we're actually having this conversation because it's so fresh. And, I think that it's, a good thing to talk about because each time was very different. The first miscarriage that I had, it was, I was almost 12 weeks. So I was at 11 weeks and 6 days when, when we discovered that the baby had stopped developing and that the heart had stopped. And so I had to have a DNC, which is surgical procedure. And that was really quite traumatic. I was, I don't know, 20 something, and so I think I was 26 probably when that happened. And it was really, shitty, to be quite frank about it. It was like, I was married to somebody else at the time. This was with my first husband, and he deployed the next day
Oh,
for 6-7 month deployment. So for me, it was like I lost my baby and I lost my husband all in the same 24-hour window. And then I was just left there to pick up the pieces of, and the thing is like, that baby wasn't planned. I was on birth control, in fact, when I got pregnant with that baby. So
wow.
that baby was determined.
Yeah.
So it was a complete surprise, and at first, when I first found out I was pregnant, I was kind of a little pissed off about it because I knew that I was probably going to, there was a likelihood that I was going to end up delivering my baby without my husband present because I knew he had this deployment coming up. And
Mm.
so at first I was kind of mad because I was like, oh my God, like you know, did not want to be a single mom. Single momhood was not something that I really was all that interested in.
Mhm.
If it was something that was interested in me, then it was going to be the way it was, but it wasn't really part of like my plan. And I know that sounds probably pretty cold to those of you single moms that are single momming it, and dude, my hat goes off to you, because like that is a hard freaking job to do it by yourself. So I just didn't think that I would be strong enough to do that. And so for me, I really was careful about, avoiding pregnancy. So when that miscarriage happened, it was like I was mad, and then I was like, okay, we're doing this, and then I became attached, and I started getting excited, and I started doing all the things to like get ready, and like the morning sickness that happens at any time of the day.
Right.
I
It's not
literally
morning.
had no, huh?
It's not morning.
Not morning, all times of the day sickness.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, I literally had like no enamel left on my teeth because I was constantly eating lemons because it was the only thing that would knock it down. And I was trying to keep it a secret from my workplace because, you know, it was a relatively new job and I didn't want to lose my job. And I had a, total jackass for a boss that was completely insensitive. And so I just did not want to tell anybody, until I had to tell them, which was going to be for me, 4 or 5 months when it started becoming obvious.
Yeah.
That's how much I was worried about my work just canning me. I didn't know back then. I was really young and stupid. Um, so you can imagine the phone call to my office to tell my boss that I'm not going to be coming into work because I am, you know, I I have a dead baby in my body and they need to surgically remove it. And I was actually really surprised at how much compassion my boss had. Very unexpected. Totally shocked, in fact. And he was like, take all the time you need,
Wow.
and that was really, comforting, especially considering that the next morning after the surgery, my husband was deploying. And so, that was just going to be how it was going to be. So I didn't really have a lot of support in it. My mom and dad, I think they wanted to support, but didn't really know how to support.
Yeah.
And I think they just kind of felt helpless to it. My husband was completely unreachable for several months. So there was absolutely zero support there. And,
Oh,
I was living in a new state where I didn't know anybody. So I really did go through that by myself. And that was really difficult. And I just kind of took my emotions and stuffed them in a box and closed the box and stapled it around all the edges and threw all the cobwebs on it and threw it in the back of my mind and said, you're just going to stay there forever. And for a long time that worked, really long time that worked. And then in 2020, uh, I got married in 2019 to my husband now. And we immediately, like you, were like, okay, we're married, let's do it. Right. Woohoo, bring on the babies. So we were really excited. Like, I mean, I was convinced that we were going to get pregnant on my wedding day. Like that was the plan, right? I think
yeah.
that's every girl's plan. But so, we were, my husband has wanted kids his entire life.
Yeah.
He told his mom when he was like, a young man, how much he can't wait to have kids and he can't wait to be a dad. And, he would call her and tell her, I just saw, this dad and his baby and I just really want that. And, so he is really like the baby bug is real with him. And it's adorable, but I have this looming past, of this miscarriage, and he knew about it. I shared with him about that. And So, first month we don't get pregnant, second month we don't get pregnant. We finally get pregnant in 2020. And uh, my cycles were starting to change because I'm getting older. And so there was just a lot of like things that were changing at once. And we all know how crazy 2020 was.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we weren't really like prepared to be pregnant during a pandemic. Like, we were trying, giving it the good old college try, doing it all the time, trying to, time it right, not knowing when ovulation was because my cycles were starting to change because of, I was getting older, whatever. And so when we finally got a, a positive pregnancy test, I felt like something was wrong. And
Mm.
I just kept thinking, is this my history that's like coming in? But I was like, I just knew something wasn't quite right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was trying to make doctor's appointments, but no doctor would see a new patient until they were like 10 or 12 weeks along. But I needed someone now. And I knew I needed someone now, but nobody would see me. And so I went to a boutique ultrasound place, like one of those ones that you go to see the baby in like, 3D or 4D or 6D or whatever the hell
Oh,
D it
okay.
is that they're
Yeah.
selling it to you as.
Yeah.
And so I just needed to see like what is going on. And
Yeah.
so I went in and they found what we all thought was a baby in very early pregnancy. There was a sac, there were cells, but that's about it. Very, very early, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the woman felt kind of bad that she couldn't get a clearer picture, but she said, I'm measuring you at right about, like 6 weeks. And I said, okay, I didn't really know what that meant in the big picture of all the things, so I just said, all right, that's good. And she goes, I want you to come back in a week and we're going to do this again. So I went back a week later and it had changed and it wasn't looking right. Like something just wasn't quite right. And so this girl felt even worse. And she was like, I want you to come back, like, in a couple days and like have an appointment with like my boss who's really is an ultrasound technician that actually does this. Because these boutique places, those people aren't ultrasound techs. They're like trained how to use the equipment and that's how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
So I went in again and the head lady did it and she's like, I don't know. She's like, it just doesn't look right. This is all I can get. And so I got all my pictures and everything. And I finally, after like calling and harassing and bugging, a particular doctor was able to get in. And the doctor was like, I don't even know what these pictures are. And it looks to me like, you must be having a miscarriage. And so I went to a different ultrasound place. I got referred to a different ultrasound place. And by the time that occurred, there was no sign of pregnancy. Like my body ate the baby, basically.
Mm-hmm.
The silver lining in that conversation with that appointment was that I had lots of follicles, and you would never know that I was the age that I am. And, at that time, I think I was 42, 41, 41.
Mm-hmm.
And, at 35, you're advanced maternal age, and at 40, you become geriatric. And so that was the comment, that a geriatric maternal age, you wouldn't know that based on what we're seeing here with your follicles. You have lots of follicles, so that's really good. There were some other issues that they discovered and, shared with me. And so, but, like fibroids, but nobody said anything about those. Nobody told me that those would keep a baby from implanting.
What?
Yeah. If you have fibroids, you will most likely not carry a baby to term because eventually they will get in the way of the development and the development will stop.
Mm.
And so, and I had them on one entire side of my uterus.
Oh my gosh.
That was in 2020, I got that information.
Yeah.
So we continue to try because the doctor that I saw was like, well, just keep trying. If it doesn't happen in a year, come back and, we'll look at giving you some fertility drugs or whatever, and we'll just take it from there. Okay, well, at 41 years old, the clock in your head is not ticking anymore. It is literally pounding on your skull, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because every month that goes by, you're 1 month older, right? And like the all of the information that's out there is that, after 35, you might as well just throw yourself in the garbage because you're worthless to make babies, right?
Yeah,
Like
it's
this is
over.
it's over. I mean, and the thing is that, this doctor said, I said, well, what if we don't get pregnant? And like, what if the drugs don't work? Like, what do we do? And he goes, it's okay. He's like, we'll just go to donor egg. Like it was just nonchalant. We'll just go to donor egg. So for those of you listening to this that don't know what donor egg is, it's another woman's egg, someone else's DNA. So basically what they do is they take someone else's egg, they mix it with my husband's sperm, and then they implant it into my uterus and hope that it takes. No comment about the fibroids though, just the donor egg. Still. So I'm immediately like crushed
Yeah.
because I'm thinking, oh my God, I've waited all these years and now I'm not going to get to have a family. And, my husband, I have a young husband who wants nothing more than a family. And he's saddled with this old woman that's got rotten eggs and a broken uterus. Okay. This is the story in my head. So fast forward,
Isn't it interesting though, the stories that we tell ourselves
yeah,
and
totally.
how
Totally.
continue?
So, here we are, still trying, being unsuccessful. It's just not working. I'm starting to think, God, maybe I am just too old. Maybe I'm just all tapped out. Like, I don't know. And I came across a program that was, about fertility issues that is just bad science, and this doctor is a scientist and she comes at it with real science information. It's not, the same song and dance that every other fertility specialist doctor in the industry as a whole is touting. It was something very different. And so we started working in this program, and then, she referred me to a doctor in Austin, and I met with the doctor, and the doctor ran a bunch of blood work and ran a bunch of tests and sent me off for ultrasound and said, we need to resurface the inside of your uterus because you have all of these fibroids, and that will keep you from getting pregnant. If the baby tries to implant on that side, it won't stick. It's like having like almost like having like scar tissue, like having
Yeah.
an entire side that was like hard collagen scar tissue. So, if that baby ever tried to implant on that side, it wouldn't be able to, like at all. And
Yeah.
so he says, we have to remove these. And I had all this buildup of like endometrial lining because, my cycles were very far apart. And so, there was just a lot of mechanical issues there.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that he discovered was he ran a test called prolactin. And so the interesting thing about that is that in those types of tests, they're not very common, right?
Mhm.
And the thing about prolactin is it puts your body in kind of like this pseudo menopause state. So like you produce prolactin when you're breastfeeding. So when a
Okay.
woman's breastfeeding, your body will produce prolactin, and what that does is it kind of like shuts down the reproductive organs so that you're not trying to build a child while feeding another one, right?
Yeah.
And so, but it's kind of like this weird little menopause state. Well, I had extremely high prolactin levels. And so this became a thing of like, well, it's the prolactin that's keeping your hormones suppressed. So you're not actually like having your cycle, right? At this point, I hadn't had a cycle in 2 years at
Oh,
all. So
yeah.
I was really thinking I'm in menopause, right? Like it's just over for me. Like it's just over. So an MRI later, we discover that, if there is something called a prolactinoma, it's a tumor on your pituitary gland. It's very small. I may or may not have it. They couldn't find it in the MRI. But for whatever reason, I was having this prolactin elevation problem. Got referred to an endocrinologist who put me on a drug called cabergoline. And that drug basically reduces the prolactin in your body.
Wow.
Go in, I have a surgery to remove all of that tissue. So uterus is squeaky clean, ready to go to be a nice little home for a baby.
Yeah.
Have my first cycle. The next cycle, I get pregnant. So
Boom.
excited, right?
Baby
And
really wants to come in. Yeah.
I mean, it was like it was funny because like I found out and then it was like I didn't want to share because I was like afraid of like, well, what if it doesn't take? What if something happens? What if, because I've done this before, right?
Yeah.
And I remember when I was telling, you and our friend Jackie, like that I didn't really want to share, she had said, but we get to celebrate with you now. And if it doesn't work, then we can be there for you after.
Yeah.
And that was like really powerful for me because I realized I actually have a community. I really do have best friends that can support me.
Yeah.
And, we were very excited and, we went in to have it all checked out and the blood tests were coming back as my HCG was declining. And so this is where things like actually got really terrible. My doctor, who got me to this point, didn't even call me to tell me that I was going to miscarry. The only reason I knew that this was going to be a miscarriage before I started actually bleeding was because the lab informed me that my test results were ready and that I saw the lab results had gone down. So
What
I
is
knew
wrong
that,
with doctors?
yeah,
Jeez.
yeah. And so, I get notified after the doctor gets notified, which means he had the results before I did. And I never heard from him. In fact, I didn't hear from anyone from the office until 5 days after my blood test results came back, which was 5 days after I had my miscarriage. And when they called, I got the medical assistant in the office. Okay, fine. The doctor doesn't have time to talk to me, whatever. But she
Sure.
couldn't even answer my questions. When can we try again? What does this mean? Why did this happen? What do you think happened? All of these questions that would naturally be questions. And there was zero
Yeah.
support, zero. And that experience was so sad. I just felt so sad and I just cried a lot. And I felt like, I was so hopeful. There was so much hope in it because I was like, I'm old, right? I've got rotten eggs, right? Like these are all the
No, you
things they
don't.
told me,
Cancel,
right?
cancel, delete, delete.
Delete. Okay. But, like there was this massive excitement and then there was this massive disappointment. And all I could think was, I'm failing my husband and my body's failing me. And that was really hard. It's hard now to talk about it,
Yeah.
because it was very painful, and it was very like swept under the rug. Like my doctor didn't even care, and when people try to help you, or they want to talk about it, and I didn't want to talk about it. I know that, like, our best friend Jackie, she was like, I want to talk to you about this. In fact, I asked you to tell her because I just couldn't tell another person. It was just too much for me. But your family is like, well, that baby just wasn't a good baby. That was just a bad body for that baby. So, a new body needs to be formed. And it's like, I know that they mean well, but
Yeah, they're not
it's
trying to be dicks,
right.
but
But
some
it's
people
just
say the darndest things,
I know. I
you
know
know?
they really do.
Like you're already going through enough. Now let's just pile on the people who are super awkward and say things
Right.
that are incredibly hurtful sometimes or inappropriate. Not saying that what they said was, but
Right.
I'm sure there's been your fair share, and I've had mine too. People just sticking their foot in their mouth
Right.
and you having to deal with the consequence of it.
Right. And I think that in the end, I think that Quinn just didn't really know what to do, what to say. He was adorable and trying to bring me food and bring me this and bring me that while I was, dying in bed, because
This is very painful for
it's
you, right?
very painful, very, very painful. And I have a really high pain threshold. Pain is something I can do. Sickness, not so much. To my stomach, the nausea, I'm not a fan, but pain I can handle, and I was in a lot of pain. So the thing that I really got in that experience is to advocate for my own care. You know, I can't trust a broken system to take care of me. I need to educate myself and learn and know what the options are before, like, even having conversations with the medical professionals that we're literally entrusting our lives and the lives of our children to. It was a real eye opener for me when, I thought that I had this advocate on my side,
Yeah.
and then to not even get a phone call about it. And look,
Yeah.
I know people are running businesses and that maybe it's a business to them, but if you're going to be in like the human services arena, there's a
Yeah.
relationship there that you need to nurture to some degree. And when
Well, and I
someone
think, yeah, I think any human services business, when you're dealing with humans, like wake up world, you can't be so transactional.
right.
You need to have relationships. And I get that a doctor would have a different relationship with a patient, but
Mhm,
it's not just a transaction. It's not just another number on a chart.
mhm.
Like that is inappropriate. If you wanted to be a doctor, you got to do the whole song and dance.
That's right.
That is a part of your job, is to learn about them. Like, no wonder care in the West has imploded on itself and people are unhealthier than ever
Mhm.
because it's become a transaction. You are a
Right.
cow.
Right.
Yeah, here's your shot.
Yep. Yeah.
No.
So, the in the end, the big picture for me is that when you look at like babies and the fact that they even exist, and like the way the mathematics behind the equation of creating new life, it's an impossibility, and it truly is a miracle. It truly is a miracle. And I do think that whatever this journey is that I'm on, that, when my babies do finally arrive, they're going to be perfectly on time and they're going to be perfectly perfect, because I feel like someone who waits as long as I have, and, and has gotten to this point, it's just what it should be.
Yeah.
So that's the place that I'm at with it now. 4 months ago, I was in a different place. And even 2 months ago, I was in a different place. And, it's just you move through the emotions. But I think that it's important to not like forget. I think a lot of that first miscarriage, I just threw it in a box and then said, I'm just going to forget about this. And so when, you know, the one in 2020 happened, that was really, it kind of like opened the box. And
Yeah.
then when the one that happened, in early June happened, that just solidified the opening of the box. And I think that as women, we don't even talk to each other about this.
No.
It's like, miscarriage seems to be this taboo topic, along with like sex and, our reproductive organs and like how they work and function. And, there's a lot of bad information, bad medical information out there that's not even accurate.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of judgment too.
Yeah.
Like we judge ourselves, or I can only speak for me, but I have judged myself and made so many assumptions. Like that's one of the craziest things about this journey that I'm grateful for, is seeing all of the bullshit that I've come up with, and like, and having the tough conversations, like you were talking about, like I'm a horrible wife, my husband's with an old cow, and like all of this stuff. And there's so much wrapped up in our minds around this, from the impact on our spouse to the impact on ourselves and who we are as a person, and like what that means about us, and all of these things. It has been one of the greatest learning journeys I have ever had, and taught me more compassion than I ever imagined was possible, and more patience for the people who stick their foot in their mouth, and um and knowing that their heart is good and it wasn't intentional. And for me, where I'm at is kind of the same place as you, where when it happens, it's going to be beautiful and wonderful, and they're going to be amazing kids. And, every time I've channeled about them, they're going to be crazy. So maybe it's a good thing that they haven't happened yet, because they're going to be a handful, all three of them. So, maybe I just need more space in my schedule before that happens. But I rest on this every single time, that whatever happens, it's always better than I could have ever imagined. And I hold on to that every single day. What is yet to come is unimaginable, and many miracles are to come. So,
Amazing.
yeah.
Well, I think that that does it for us for today. We kind of kept you longer than we usually do, and we appreciate you hearing our stories. And, let us know if you have similar story, if you'd like to share your story. We'd love to hear it and hold that space for you. And begin to normalize the conversation around, you know, women's reproduction, miscarriage, loss. I think that these are all conversations that are really important to have. And, we can come together as a community and support one another, in a really loving way. But we can't if we don't talk about it. So we love you, and we will see you next week.
Bye.